Hello class, welcome to week 8, final week. We've enjoyed learning a lot about the G1000. For our GPS research presentation, I chose to study the Garmin GTN series. I've worked with the Garmin GNS 43530, the G1000. This series so far has been my favorite. I did a lot of my instrument training with. I started out on the Garmin 650. The plane I fly now has a Garmin 750. They're very similar. Let's get into it. There's technically 10 models of the Garmin GTN series. Why I say 10 is because they recently released an upgraded XI version. They're all pretty much the same unit. They have the same software, but the XI version, it's advertised to boot 50% faster due to its dual-core processor. In real-world situations, I find that the 650 and 750 boot very quick compared to some older GPSs, so that would be pretty impressive to improve on that time. But we got a 625, 35, 50, and then a 725 and a 750. Each one of those has its own feature set, and I got a chart here. This is from Garmin's website. Very detailed model comparison. Has everything from screen size to what radios it has. But the most notable takeaways from this, the 50 series, so 650 and 750, they have built-in comm and nav radios. One thing to note, across all the models, they all support WAS, they all support XM weather, and only the bigger screen 700 series can show IFR charts on the screen. I'm not sure if they're considered your only legal chart. When we were reading or learning about the G1000 in King schools, Martha King said that even though the G1000 will display approach plates, that doesn't count as the only legal copy. We still have to have an EFB or a paper version. It does a lot of functions as an MFD. Everything I could find, it does all the features on the G1000 and then some. This is just the main map page. We have map, traffic, terrain, XM weather, as well as ADSB weather. Charts, again, only available on the larger screen version. Flight plan, waypoint info, services page. We'll talk more about that later. They built in some features such as satellite messaging, satellite email, and then other utilities and fuel planning information. The GTN series, I think, is the most intuitive of Garmin's current setup. Unlike the G1000 or GNS 43530 series, it still has the dual control knob, but it also has a touchscreen. So you can enter the exact name of airport names or waypoint names using a QWERTY keyboard, same as what's on your desktop computer, or alphabetically ABCDEF. You can have the full keyboard in view, or you can set it to have like a slider where you can just pick the letters out, which is very easy. The way they design the touchscreen, it has very familiar gestures similar to an iPhone or an iPad. There's pinch to zoom and dragging and dropping. It's all very, very easy if you've ever used a multi-touch iPhone or iPad. So let's talk about the radio. All the Dash 50 models, so that's 650 and 750 top of the line models, they have an integrated comm and nav radio. In dual integrations, where you might have a 750 and a 650, the two units can talk to each other's radios, and you can do remote tuning. So you can tune your COM 1, COM 2, NAV 1, NAV 2 all from the same page on either of the GPS screens, which is very handy to have. One feature that I like a lot, pretty much every Garmin GPS has a nearest page, but on the latest generation of the XI GTN series, they added a couple more features. In the case of an engine out situation, the newer XI series can display a glide range. And if you use ForeFlight, you might be familiar with this. It takes into account terrain and wind data and estimates how far your aircraft could glide. Along with the glide range ring display, the nearest airports are ranked not only by distance, but if it calculates that you can glide to it. The system recommends airports for landing, again, based on glide distance, taking into account terrain, and it puts that little green checkbox that you see here on each recommended airport that's on the nearest page. And then moving on to the flight plan, Just like other Garmin GPSs, you can build out a flight plan, put in all your waypoints ahead of time. The GTN series has a really nice graphical routing. It lets you visualize the entire flight plan once you've built it, and that can include everything from departures, arrivals, instrument approaches, hold procedures, and more. As soon as you start typing in the flight plan, the GTN series will recommend a point. If you put in a point near an airport, it knows the points in the general area, so as soon as you start typing the first couple letters, it'll recommend, do you want this point, because it's pretty nearby. It's kind of like predictive text on your iPhone. It's easy to enter Victor Airways and high altitude jet routes. Similar to the G1000, you put in your first waypoint, you put in the name of the airway, and then you can put your exit, and it populates all the points in between. Very easy for IFR routes. If you use Garmin Pilot or ForeFlight and your GTN series has Bluetooth capability, you can build your entire flight plan on your iPad and then push it off to the GPS, so you save time. After startup, you don't have to sit there and build the entire flight plan into the GPS. You can just sync it with your iPad and it's immediately there. There's a few more map features that are really handy, I think. One is here on the left. That's a screenshot of what Garmin calls rubber band features. You can graphically edit the flight plan. Again, if you use ForeFlight, you might be familiar with this. You can click on the leg and drag it to another waypoint or airport, and it'll add it to the route. It's very handy. It's called rubber band because you can stretch and move the line on the screen, kind of like stretching a rubber band around nails. It has a full terrain database, just like a G1000 would. It shows you the same red-yellow color scheme for your altitude. And then again, charts, even if they're not considered your only legal copy to have in the cockpit with you, it's still nice to see your plane on a big moving map display with an instrument approach, for example. And then IFR features, like we talked about earlier, every GTN series is WASP capable. Having a WASP GPS really expands your landing options, enabling GPS approaches with localizer performance. That's also known as LPV approaches. That will give you a glide path approach down to minimums, similar to an ILS, with typically the exact same minimums that an ILS would have. When loading procedures, the GTN series will pre-enter nav frequencies, just like the G1000 would, for very quick access. It will even switch automatically from GPS mode to VLOC for you and tune and ID that localizer, for example. All GTN series support ADS-B, along with the basics of ADS-B traffic, ADS-B weather. You have XM weather as well. Along with that XM, you can have a subscription to be able to do text messaging through the GPS through satellite. That would be very handy in a situation if you're flying, say, a small airplane, ferrying it over a transatlantic flight out in the middle of nowhere over the ocean with no radio communications. You could still send and receive text messages with pretty much anyone you want. That is, if you care to pay for the extra subscription for that. Still a very nice feature to have for certain situations. Let's talk about safety, technically advanced aircraft, and other add-ons. All of these things can enhance a pilot's situational awareness, which in turn enhances safety. Garmin Flight Stream is a technology that Garmin calls their Bluetooth. It's really not that fancy. You can integrate your iPad with your GTN series, stream ADS-B weather and XM weather to and from the iPad, to and from the GPS, sync your flight plan. Makes it really easy to have all that information readily available in two different places. With the GTN series, you can also connect that up to a Garmin Attitude Indicator, HSI. Here in the picture, we have two Garmin G5s on the left, and on the right, these are Garmin 275s. They're just glass attitude indicator and HSI. They can be very basic instruments, or you can even add more features to it, like a moving map. You can display ADS-B weather on the HSI. Very nice for situational awareness. Autopilot connectivity. If you have your glass display, your MFD, and you pair that with a 2-axis autopilot, your plane is considered technologically advanced aircraft. Depending on your autopilot, your Garmin, once you plug in an approach, let's say an LPV approach, your autopilot could fly that whole approach for you basically to the ground without any intervention. In the right hands, that is a very safe thing to have. It reduces the pilot's workload. When you're having a reduced workload, that gives you more time to enhance your situational awareness and know what's going on. In order to do that, you do have to have good training. You can't just hop in and go. My sources for this presentation are all direct from Garmin and King Schools. If you open up the PowerPoint file, you can click on each of these to read. Garmin publishes a pilot's guide and a cockpit reference guide for pretty much every GPS they put out. Very good to read that before doing anything that might be considered hard IFR. And then King School's Garmin GTN course, it's free. I think there's 5 or 6 videos. A really good course to get the basics of the GTN down before flying that. Thank you for watching.